You can't do transition in this world on energy without being a bit pragmatic and without involving the energy companies themselves, because you can say they're the problem or they're part of the problem, but unless they're part of the solution, it's going to take forever.
You might remember episode 1 last season when we talked about methane. Methane is the primary component of natural gas. But when it's emitted into the atmosphere, it's a really potent greenhouse gas, as much as 30 times stronger than carbon dioxide, depending on how you measure it. Scientists estimate that nearly a third of the warming we're experiencing today is due to methane emissions. When it comes to methane emissions from the energy system, we know how to find and fix them. It's just a matter of technology and money. Today, we'll discuss both of these issues. I'm Samantha Gross. I'm the director of the Energy Security and Climate Initiative at the Brookings Institution, and I've spent my career focused on energy and environmental issues. I've been in Washington for more than 20 years now, working on energy policy in government and private industry before I came to Brookings. But I started my career as an engineer, designing technical solutions to environmental problems. My work now focuses on how to transition to a clean, zero-carbon energy system, the technical, political, and social challenges in getting from here to there. Let's start with a focus on the technology side of dealing with methane leaks.
So my name is Deepak Anand. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at GHGSat. We are a Montreal-based green tech company. We help operators around the world of landfills, oil and gas, coal mining sites to better understand their emissions and really specifically their methane fugitive emissions. We use proprietary technology that we have built into sensors, and we actually mount these on satellites and on aircraft to do these from space and from the skies. This allows unprecedented scale and allows us to cover many more parts of the world than have been able to be done in the past.
It's easy to understand why you want to find methane leaks. But why do you need airplanes and satellites to do it? Methane is difficult to detect, and it is lighter than air, so it rises as it's released. Ground-level sensors won't necessarily pick up leaks. Plus, you would need many expensive, finicky sensors to cover all the area of a large production or processing facility. Putting the sensors on airplanes or satellites allows them to cover a wide area of the surface with just a few sensors. This is especially great for large operators that are bound to have a few leaks somewhere, just based on their size. But the question is, where?
And the way I kind of compare it is, if you live in a really small house with 1 or 2 windows, yeah, you probably don't have a leak for air conditioning or your heating from a window or a door. But now if you live in a bigger house that has 4 different doors and 18 windows, you probably have a leak. Well, then what about someone who owns an office building that's 65 floors and has over 4 million square feet of building space? They have a leak. Something somewhere is leaking. So we help those clients that are that big. So think large oil and gas, large landfill, large coal mining. We work with the biggest in the world and we help them to find those leaks. But then there's also a lot of clients that have like 15, 20, or even 50 different sites all around the world. So you need that constant monitoring at scale. I think a lot of these operators know they have leaks. They know they have the issue. And they also know that the solution is often going to be A, B, or C. They have the data to say, well, the last 25 leaks that we fixed, they were of these 3 categories. So the issue is not the what and the how. The issue is the where. It's where do we go to fix this? And again, if you're a house with 2 windows and I say a window's leaking, you can check both windows. If you're a house with 40 windows, it takes a little bit longer. But if it's a condo building with 10,000 windows, different story, right? So it's just the idea of being able to identify where the problem is, figuring out the problem, and then fixing it is usually not the hardest part.
Okay, so now we've found those methane leaks that are bound to happen in equipment. Nobody and nothing is perfect. Mistakes and equipment malfunctions happen. Then what?
The other nice thing that we've noticed is that most operators want to know where the problem is. They want to fix it. Nobody's burying their head in the sand. Nobody's ignoring it. Even in jurisdictions where regulations are not pushing them to do anything, even in those jurisdictions, they're coming to us saying, hey, can you help us to identify where problems are? Because we want to be the cleanest oil and gas producer or the cleanest waste management company in the world. So it's really, really nice to see that both the intent is there, the resourcing, whether it's people or funding, and the technology have all met at a time when, to be honest, we need it pretty much yesterday. So everyone's ready to do something about it because we really need to do something about it. Like, we have to fix this. If half the oil and gas companies in the world have no leaks and half continue to leak, nothing's going to matter. We really need to work on this together. So it's really nice that everyone wants to share that information.
Yep, clearly we do have to fix these problems. They make a serious difference in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions right now. My next guest is implementing these leak detection programs in some of the world's most difficult environments. You heard him speak at the start of this episode.
So my name is Arne Peder Blix, and I'm the CEO of Immediate Climate Action Finance, ICA Finance. We're based in Oslo, and we do immediate climate action through elimination of financial barriers. So what we do is we partner with national oil companies and independent oil producers to realize scalable emission reductions that can be achieved rapidly. So that's methane, number one, and flaring. And that's really what I'm going to be doing the next 10 years for sure.
How does one get into this business?
That's an excellent question. I came from the shipping industry. I'm Norwegian. Actually, I came into it as a Norwegian Navy officer. I even used to drive submarines for a living. So I have an attitude towards safety and towards risk. And then I left the industry, oil and gas industry, around 2002-03, because I felt myself, this is not good for Mother Earth, and I don't feel like wanting to be a part of it, to be frank. And then I went into the financial services industry, fintech industry, and built a successful company and sold it, and then reinvested into a lot of different companies in technology. And now I come back here running this thing, which is really financial alchemy. And it's really the mix between political and financial work, and to be able to balance agreements such that it's possible for everyone to earn, not just Mother Earth, but everyone else should also be able to have a profitable project within this segment.
Just because something really needs to be done doesn't mean there's money available to do it, especially outside wealthy countries. Arne has one of the most interesting business models I've ever heard. He matches money with projects to achieve greenhouse gas emissions reductions that matter right now.
We work only in emerging markets. So we started in Nigeria almost 20 years ago. And there's been done a lot of proof of concept in more than 20 countries over the years. But now we are focusing to scale up in Nigeria, in the Middle East, in North Africa, in the whole Central Asian basin, Pan-Caspian countries, and also Latin America. So we have 25, 27 countries on my list, and none of them are tourist destinations, I think is a way to put it. They all have their own challenges, and typical challenge is that they are having infrastructure that is leaking methane, and they have a lot of flaring, and they have challenges getting the financial situation for these projects solved. So a lot of these projects are not necessarily investment grade, so to speak. So they use their infrastructure hard. And as the gas price increases, and oil price is stable, they will just try to get as much up out of the ground as they can, and with the same infrastructure. And they don't necessarily have the ability to gather upfront financing and to handle the complex nature of doing these sort of projects. So we help them by project identification and assessment, project financing, removing the financial barriers. We de-risk and help the implementation of the projects and make sure that the emission reductions remain verified, validated, and then we actually are able to monetize the emission reductions as offsets. What we are doing is, I wouldn't say it's very high-tech. Some niche things can be a bit high-tech, and we do leverage satellite imagery and that sort of thing to identify. But on the ground, this is about piping, compressors, sealants, valves, and really renewing existing infrastructure. This is really being pragmatic and understanding that this infrastructure will be used hard regardless. So we're just there to improve the infrastructure to such a degree that it is possible to reduce the methane and the flaring.
You heard Arne say a word that you might remember from the last episode on climate finance: de-risking. Investing money in places that aren't tourist destinations involves more risk. Arne describes what de-risking means in his space.
When it comes to de-risking, it's really the financial problem. And the financial problem is a political problem. And there are many risks in that respect. There are market risks. The carbon credit price, number one. It has been coming up and down over the last 15, 20 years, since Kyoto really. And that has created a lot of financial barriers because of the turbulence of the carbon markets. But there are other risks, implementation risks, execution risks on the ground to actually implement these projects because these are challenging environments. And then, of course, there's the physical risk. There can be terror, there can be sabotage, there can be kidnapping, there can be a lot of other things in some of these more politically unstable countries. There's also corruption risk, there's money laundering risk, there's FX risks. So you have to manage all that. So for us to de-risk an investment encompasses a lot of different disciplines, and that's what we all bring all together into one and same company. So many people say I should have green filt on my desk because we are taking a lot of financial risk and a lot of other types of risk, and we have to manage all of them.
Wow, that's a lot. When you hear all that, it's a wonder any kind of project gets done in those environments. But as we've been saying, these projects are needed. In these countries, infrastructure is pushed hard, and there isn't money available for upgrades. Many of these countries depend on revenue from oil and gas to keep their economies running, and they aren't slowing operations just because the equipment is old. I like Arne's reference to rolling the dice across the green felt. But there must be some serious reward to take these significant risks. How much emissions reductions are we talking about?
We have done 10 million tons of CO2 emission reduction equivalent as proof of concepts. This has been done as a small private company over the last 20 years. Trial and error and a lot of experience. So I came on board 1st of January 22 to scale this up, to make it a more industrial undertaking where we scale up in a lot of different countries at the same time. Our goals are to, with the help of Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, Climate Investments, which is our investment partner, enabling this scale up, this ability to run so many projects in so many countries at the same time. We're aiming at doing 50 plus million tons more over the next 6-7 years. And I would say this is to do two things. It's, of course, to show the world that this is possible and to do it in a equally profitable and impactful way. Because if this is not actually turning a revenue, I'm sorry, but we won't really get the large-scale, high-quality, high-integrity emission reductions that are so much needed. So we are definitely in the trenches or even beyond. So our job is to do the trailblazing, to open up these markets and make it possible for a lot of other players to see this is possible, this is meaningful, this is even profitable, so that more people can do what we do. Because as much as I'd like to say we are going to do all of it ourselves, no, I mean, we can't. The job is too big.
For comparison purposes, 15 million tons of CO2 equivalent is the amount that 3.2 million cars emit in a year, or the equivalent of taking every car in North Carolina off the road for a year. Will this fix the climate problem single-handedly? Definitely not. But Arne and ICA Finance aren't trying to fix the problem alone. They are in the business of trailblazing and showing that improvements can happen and that financing them is possible, even in challenging environments. That financing comes from offsets, businesses paying for emissions reductions elsewhere because they are cheaper and easier than making them in their own operations. We talked about the peril and promise of offsets in the climate finance episode. Arne gives us an example of offsets at work.
Very simply put, we are in the duct tape department. That means the most effective almost and cheapest is leakage detection and repair programs. And then you follow a certain methodology, and then you're able to first measure the baseline of the emissions. And then you do a systematic project or program where you do leakage detection and repair. A lot of labor, but not necessarily a lot of cost, not so much investment. And then afterwards, you actually then verify that the emission reductions have actually taken place. And you follow this very stringent regime of monitoring, reporting, and verification. And then you have a third party, preferably, coming in and validating and verifying your work. Then you actually have achieved verified emission reductions that you could potentially monetize. And then we get paid. So we only get paid if and when we actually have achieved all of that. So that means on my greenfield desk where I take all the risk, my exposure time for one particular project can be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and then maybe you get paid. And we are selling emission reductions, verified search, carbon credits or whatever else. They could be verified contributions, but they should be definitely high impact, high volume, high integrity, high quality. And when we then sell this, monetize this, the buyers are really asking us for the reputation risk. And the reputation risk, that's where you can get the premium, because it's really for the super majors and for the private companies we all have heard about who are high energy consumers, for example, whether they can trust that there's no double accounting, whether they can trust that these emissions have actually taken place. And if they feel the reputation risk for that is low, so they can even put it in their annual report or however else they want to leverage their efforts, that's when we can get a decent price for our efforts.
These emissions reductions are real and verified. And Arne explained how they just wouldn't happen without the financial support that comes from selling offsets. I'd describe this as the definition of a good offset. One question that I'm sure comes up in the mind of listeners is that these efforts are helping the oil and gas sector run better. Is this a great idea in a world where we want to get away from fossil fuels? Should we be shutting these facilities down, not fixing them?
The world will be dependent upon oil for many, many years to come. We need to address the issue at the same time with existing infrastructure as we are dealing with renewable energy sources. The heavy hydrocarbon-powered industries like cement, aluminum, and steel, they're going to have to keep on trucking. We can't really do without aluminum, steel, and cement. And you can't make those with solar or with ocean wind. I'm sorry, it's just not possible because it requires a lot more power. And I know there will be a lot of people listening to this show who could have opinions about this, that, and the other, what I'm saying. But I can assure you, do the homework, do the math, look at what we're actually talking about for cement, aluminum, and steel. And then renewable energy is not going to cut it. The base load has to be taken by something else. And at this point, we're kind of locked into the hydrocarbon age, but we're stopping coal slowly but surely. We're looking at very good ways of capturing the CO2 and doing smart things with it, etc. But that's going to take time. And therefore, doing immediate action on methane and flaring, it's very low-hanging fruit, it's low cost, and it's high impact. And frankly, Samantha, that's why I have the best job in the world, because I feel I'm actually right where I should be, right where it's meaningful to do hard work. And I know we all would wish that we could live without hydrocarbons. Well, not all of us wish that, but it's not realistic to think that we can just stop. Even if you wanted to stop today, anything from cars to diesel generators, there are 55 million diesel generators just in Nigeria alone, and then they wouldn't have any power. So they would be going back in time instead of helping them forward by going from diesel to gas, for example. So this transition, you can't do transition in this world on energy without being a bit pragmatic and without involving the energy companies themselves. Because you can say they're the problem or they're part of the problem, but unless they're part of the solution, you make them part of the solution, this is not going to take 10 years or 5 years or 7 years. It's going to take forever. So we have to get them on board and understand the immediacy, particularly on methane and flare. And that's the start of a long journey. But we have to solve it with the energy companies. Still, there will be, unfortunately, greed, and there will be reasons why people don't want to change. To change that, it takes persistence. And that persistence, we have to be relentless. We cannot do anything but try our hardest. And at the same time, I tell my team, because this can be really frustrating work. I mean, seriously. And therefore, I'm telling them, this is an adventure, guys. This is an adventure. We are in the adventure business. That means, sometimes the country just doesn't want to go in our direction. Then we just have to wait for a while and work somewhere else. But we cannot stop working, and we cannot stop working on the most challenging problems, because that's typically where the biggest emissions are. And I can tell you just what is needed. One word. Are you ready for it? Here it comes. Money. Because, sorry guys, that's what's going to solve this. Not a lot of passionate idealism. I'm sorry, this has to be solved by financing.
And I'm grateful that Arne and his team are in the business of being relentless and financing these investments. Arne points out that the financing is possible, especially since he can sell these emissions reductions as very high-quality offsets. Deepak Anand lets us know that the technology part really is possible too.
And I think we're actually at a critical point right now where the technology has reached a point where we can now start to make a tangible impact and actually start to fulfill the 2-degree goal that we have for the world. And, we've never been there before. I think now what has to change is that it's there. It's on the shelf. It's ready to go. Now it's less talk. Now it's less about theory and planning, and it's all about action. There's lots of debate, but the one that I like to hold on to is if we correct the methane issues that we can correct right now. So with technology and data and hardware we have right now, we should be able to get to 1 degree of the 2-degree pledge. So we can get halfway to our goal just dealing with one greenhouse gas, and then we deal with the other one. This is that big chunky part we need to do first. And the nice thing is I think people get that now, because people have been talking last year was the methane moment. Now it's starting to happen. We just need to all keep doing more and more of it.
I'll go back to my earlier point on fossil fuels. We can get hung up on the long-term goal of eliminating fossil fuels and forget that making fossil fuels better is still a worthwhile endeavor, especially if these are emissions reductions we can have right now. I'm a big believer that the fossil fuel industry must be part of the clean energy transition. And while we still use fossil fuels, we want them to be as clean as possible.
We're at a critical point where we now have what we need to fix probably the biggest problem facing the world. And that's both scary and awesome at the same time. But it'd be much scarier if we just had the problem with none of the solution. And there's a lot of very dedicated people and smart people that want to fix this. And there's also, it's big business. And there's a lot of money here, which is kind of a good thing, because if it wasn't, you just don't get as much interest in it. And, governments are interested, agencies are interested, businesses interested. If everyone wants to fix this problem for whatever reason, and now they have the tools to do it, we're in a great spot.
This is a very optimistic episode, and for good reason. I'm telling you that an important contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions is fixable. We sometimes get hung up in the really hard things we need to do to cope with climate change. Changing the world's energy system is hard. Changing how key heavy industries fuel themselves is hard. But there are easier things we can do in the short term to bring emissions down and help buy us more time to accomplish the harder changes. Eliminating methane emissions is one of those easier tasks. We can do this. Many thanks to the experts I talked to in this episode. Climate Sense is brought to you by the Brookings Podcast Network. Fred Dews is the producer, Gaston Reborero, the audio engineer. Thanks also to Kuwilaleni Hawanga, Daniel Morales, and Luis Ansal, and to the communications teams in Brookings Foreign Policy and the Office of Communications. Show art was designed by Shivanti Mendes. You can find episodes of Climate Sense wherever you get your podcasts, and learn more about this show at brookings.edu/climatesensepodcast. You'll also find my work on climate change and research from the Brookings Initiative on Climate Research and Action on the Brookings website. I'm Samantha Gross, and this is Climate Sense.